Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are tuned to the Nighttime Podcast, focused on the fringe of Canada.
Hello listeners. During the history of this show, I've highlighted several major Canadian UFO events, and in doing so have attempted to focus on the more reasonable discourse that surrounds them. I'm thinking about past episodes like the ones about Shag Harbour, Falcon Lake, and Clarenville, Newfoundland. In my opinion, these are some of Canada's most deserving of intelligent discussion and public attention. But admittedly, there's something they all lack. And I'm of course talking about that tabloidy intrigue that features shadowy figures risking life and limb to expose an even shadowier government cover-up. Well, tonight's UFO case may not be as credible as Canada's big ones, but what it lacks in proof, it makes up for 10 times in pure, unadulterated sci-fi tropes. The Carp case, which is also known as the Guardian case, is easily among Canada's most infamous UFO stories. Although the meat and potatoes of the story is widely considered to be a hoax, it was effective enough to have the story and its central figures featured on a long list of high-profile television documentaries. The Carp, Ontario UFO case widely centers on an anonymous whistleblower using the name Guardian, who for a period of time in the late 80s into the early 90s sent strange packages to UFO researchers around the world, claiming that the world's governments were attempting to cover up the crash of an extraterrestrial craft just outside of Ottawa. The packages included a rambling manifesto, photographs of what was said to be aliens, and perhaps most interesting, it included a VHS tape that contained video of what was supposed to be a landed flying saucer. Despite significant attempts at the time, the Guardian nor any evidence of an extraterrestrial craft were ever discovered. But people sure tried. In fact, they're still trying today. This case, the Carp or Guardian case, is just now, almost 30 years later, about to get its moment in the sun. CBC has just premiered its documentary on the case, titled UFO Town. And, well, it's as fascinating as this bizarre story. And we're about to get into it tonight. Our guest is just the fella to walk us through this case. At present day, Ian Rogers is an author. But in the early 90s, when the investigation into the Guardian case was active, Ian was a teenage UFO investigator and, well, he managed to walk right into the middle of one of Canada's most bizarre cases. It was filled with egos, half-truths, and of course allegations of an intergalactic cover-up playing out in small-town Ontario. The CBC documentary UFO Town was largely based on Ian's research on the case. And tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, Ian Rogers is going to walk us through his experiences with the Carp, Ontario, aka the Guardian UFO case. Ian, I'm so happy to have you on the show. I guess now you're not only a UFO investigator, but you're like a budding TV star. I think we're about 2 or 3 days out from you being a certified UFO TV star. Is that fair to say?
Oh, I knew that I had shot a lot of footage with them, but with any TV thing, you don't really know how much they're going to end up using. So even when they told me that I was, I think the term they used was a central figure in the documentary, I still didn't completely believe them until my wife and I got a bit of a sneak preview, advanced look at this thing a couple weeks ago, and I have to admit I had a drink. I had an alcoholic beverage with me to sort of settle the nerves because I was very nervous to see it. And if you've already seen it, then you know that I'm in it quite a bit. So yeah. A lot of people don't really know about this. My family, my parents know, my wife knows, but there's not a lot of people in my extended family who really know about this until I started promoting it on social media this week. So I think for as many people who even know that I was involved in this stuff, they definitely didn't know that I shot something that's going to be airing on the CBC in a couple of days.
Yeah, well, luckily they call you central figure rather than like the, UFO researcher, which is much more tinfoil hat. Central figure is a pretty respectable title in the UFO world, I would think.
Yeah, I think it works for me.
All things considered. Well, all I know about you myself is your connection to researching the Guardian or the Carp UFO case. Before we get into your work on that case, tell me a bit about you. What's your background aside from getting mixed up in this crazy story?
Well, these days I'm a full-time writer. I write novels, short stories, that sort of thing. I've always had an interest in the paranormal and the supernatural. That goes back to my childhood. My parents are all from the East Coast, Nova Scotia, and everyone in the Maritimes loves a good ghost story. I remember growing up visiting family in Cape Breton, cousins, aunts and uncles. Everyone had a ghost story, and everyone swore that it was true. They weren't trying to scare you. It was just part of. It wasn't even the folklore. It's part of almost like the history of that area. Ghosts and like sea monster stories, all kinds of weird stuff across the whole spectrum of the supernatural. And I was just always interested from a really young age. I think just because my family took it seriously, I always took it seriously, even though I'd never had any kind of encounter myself. And then as a child of the 80s, I just grew up on movies, so it was E.T., Close Encounters, all the alien stuff. And then in the 90s, when I was a teenager, it was the X-Files. And I just always wanted to be a Ghostbuster, be a paranormal investigator. And when this Guardian case came up, the first time I saw it was on Unsolved Mysteries, and realized this was something that was happening only a couple of hours away from my house. I realized this was something I could actually look into. Whereas before, everything else was always happening elsewhere, some other place in the world. You'd see it on TV or read about it in a book. This one was within driving distance. So I thought, hey, I'm going to check this out.
Oh, very cool. I didn't realize you had a connection to Nova Scotia and Cape Breton. I'm in Nova Scotia, originally from Cape Breton. So the story, like that folklore and all that stuff that you're talking about, I have the same like origin story, so to speak.
Yeah, no, my family is a big, like my mom's side is from Cape Breton and my dad's side lives in Oxford. And actually my dad's cousin was Stan Rogers, the musician.
Oh, so, yeah.
So a bit of a folk music connection there for the trivia buffs.
that is very cool. Yeah. So you talked a bit about how you had an interest in kind of the supernatural and paranormal as a child. How did like the UFO phenomenon become a part of your life? Because I read the article you wrote on CBC. It talked a bit about like this idea of you being this sort of teenage UFO investigator. How did that start?
I'd always been interested, and from UFOs, I think that there was more of a scientific angle. I mean, generally people believe that there are life on other planets. It's sort of a mathematical certainty. Whether or not they're visiting our planet was sort of in question. So I felt like there was more of a scientific approach to investigating UFOs. And my father was a constable in the RCMP at the time. So again, sort of dovetailed with my interest in the X-Files, that if there was a serious investigation of this, if there was a real life X-Files, that's probably what I'd be doing these days and not, being a writer. So I think that's really, it's sort of all these things sort of dovetailed, combined with this case that just happened to appear at the right time. It was a perfect storm of events that you can never really have predicted, much less planned for.
Yeah. And then you get into, of all the cases you decide to jump into, you choose Guardian, which is, I would call it like, I think I could confidently say it is Canada's most infamous UFO case. I think I would give most famous to like Shag Harbor or
Falcon Lake or something.
Yeah, something like that. But Guardian, it really takes the cake for just being infamous and weird, and like a lot of big personalities and egos kind of battle it out within that story. And we'll get into all that. But tell me this, when you first, you hear of the Guardian or Carp case existing near you and you're wanting to learn more, how much did you know about it at that point? Like, what was the story you knew when you first stuck your nose in?
Yeah, I think the first mention was, for me, like a lot of people, was the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast, which I believe was January or February of '93. And so I just knew what was told in the the segment, which was like maybe 10 minutes long. And there was this UFO incident in West Carleton and Carp. It was witnessed by this woman from her backyard. There was a videotape that was shot independently by this mysterious figure who calls himself Guardian. And it's like I said in the CBC documentary, it was like a movie. I was so well versed in the UFO lore. I've read all the books, watched documentaries, the TV shows at the time. There's nothing like Guardian. It's this mysterious figure, sending out these videotapes with his thumbprint on the label, these documents. It's the tape itself is kind of spooky. It's again, it was like it was custom made for me. I'd investigated other sightings before that and a few after Guardian, but nothing compares. After Guardian, everything's downhill as a UFO investigator. Even though I strongly believe, like a lot of the serious investigators, that it was a hoax. Mm-hmm. It's such an interesting case, even from just the psychology of belief and why we believe things, even from Guardian himself. Why do we do these things? If he was a genuine whistleblower, why would he do this? If he was a hoaxer, why would he do this? It's just compelling for so many reasons. And I think that was the reason why the people behind UFO Town decided to focus this documentary on it, because it was a story that really needed to be told. Even from the Unsolved Mystery segments, sightings, encounters, they only told a fraction of the story. They never told the whole thing. You'd have to go online and Google it to really get the MUFON Ontario final report, which is usually how people find me online, because I mentioned in that report. That's even now over the years, a few times a year, people will contact me and ask me, as an author, are you the same Ian Rogers that was involved in the Guardian case?
And you I think are one of the last remaining living people involved in it. A lot of the main names associated with it have passed away, I think, in the last 5 or 10 years. Is that fair to say?
Two of them died just last year. Bob Exler died last year, and Tom Theophanous, who was one of the original investigators.
Yeah.
Errol Bruce Knapp, who was a good friend of mine. He died 6 or 7 years ago. He used to host a radio show on CFRB in Toronto called Strange Days Indeed, and I was a guest co-host on that for a number of years when I lived in Toronto in the early 2000s. And we did a retrospective on Guardian back then. It always came up because people didn't know the full story. All they knew was the Unsolved Mystery segment, encounters, sightings. The sort of the denouement of the case was never really publicly known. Bob Exler talked about writing a book. Other people talked about writing books, but they never materialized. Even I thought about writing a book, but the problem with the Guardian case is that there's no really satisfying final act. It's it's a hoax. In my opinion, I believe it was very, very clearly that it was a hoax. We never heard anything from Guardian since those videotapes. So he never did send out any more material. And the problem is that the market for a UFO book, people either want to know that it's aliens in the end, or at the very least they want some ambiguity. So my book had no final act, so I never wrote it ultimately.
Well, let's get into the story and walk through it a bit. And one aspect of this case that I don't think I even realized until the UFO Town documentary is really there's two separate events that happen. There's an initial sighting, and then letters that follow that. But it isn't until a couple of years later that the actual videotape that this case is so well known for came out. Tell me about the initial sighting that plays out. I think it was in 89 is when the first sighting, and I can't remember her name. Was it Diane Callback?
Diane Labinek, yes.
Labinek, yes.
This, you have to understand, is a very small rural community. Mannion Corners is what it's called, at Corkery Road, this intersection where Diane lives still. 89 Guardian sent out was basically a 2-sheet report and a photograph of what he said was an alien, and was describing this. It's essentially like a UFO crash retrieval operation in the swamp around that area. An investigator went to check it out, a local Canadian UFO investigator, and found nothing, no evidence of anything. I think there was a couple of people that reported seeing a light or something. I believe Diane Labinek was one of them, because they followed up with her in the 91 reports. But there was really nothing that came up. There was no videotape at that point, no photographs. And there was just as many people in the area who reported seeing nothing at that time in '89. So again, it was just sort of people just dismissed it. Guardian had sent some stuff that had talked about sort of right-wing conspiracies. And I believe it was actually, some of it was sent to the RCMP at that time because it was very similar, as I recall, to white supremacist literature. Even though it wasn't specifically racist in time, the tone was very similar in that style.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, when we say Guardian, this is almost like an anonymous person who is sending packages to like UFO investigators explaining, this crazy thing is happening in this small town, and they go on to then spew what borders on like almost, like you said, like white supremacy, far right kind of rambling kind of stuff. So in '89, there was this first sighting and some of this documentation was sent out. There was a very brief investigation. Nothing of substance was found. No one knows who Guardian is, but they really upped their game. And I think it's in '91 when the second series of packages are sent out. Tell me a bit about those packages, because those are the ones that really this story is encompasses for the most part.
Yeah, so in a couple of years later, in the fall of '91, when early 1992, UFO investigators in Canada and the U.S. and I think a few abroad as well start receiving these packages, new material from Guardian. This time there's government documents. I use that term very loosely because they don't look at all like government documents, but he gets points for effort. There are playing cards with conspiracy ramblings on them. There are diagrams of how alien spacecraft evade our radar, and there's a videotape. And the videotape shows what's alleged to be a UFO landed on the ground with 4 red flares burning off to the left. The video does not show the craft arriving or departing. And at the very end of the tape, there's a series of still images that supposedly show an alien entity, which is basically a figure in a black outfit with glowing white hands and a white sort of self-luminescent head with a classic almond-shaped eyes sort of thing. And the document detailed that this event had happened in August of '91. So it was about 6 months after this alleged event that the videotapes started going out.
Okay. And the way I understand it as well, I don't know how much you know of this, but it wasn't all the people who received this document or this package from Guardian. They didn't all receive the same tape. It seems like some people had slightly different kind of scenes like mixed in the end as far as what Guardian was showing. Then I
think Newfound Ontario got I think the longest version of it, which was like the full version with audio. I think Bob Exler got a shortened version. I'm pretty sure his didn't have an audio track, as I recall. I'm trying to remember this after 25 years, but I'm pretty good on those details. I'm almost positive that Bob's didn't have an audio track. And yeah, I think it was just, it was really random because it wasn't just UFO investigators who were sent this stuff. There was, I believe it was the University of Ottawa, or maybe Carleton had also received material there. There was a lot of, when we were trying to figure out who Guardian was back in the day, there was some suggestion that it might have been someone who had access to the local Usenets, sort of the precursor to the internet, because there wasn't a lot of internet access back then. This was sort of the nascent days of the internet, which led sort of the idea that it might have been a student, because why would you send this stuff to UFO investigators, some, internationally, and then also to people in the Ottawa area, like Ottawa, educational institutions. It was just seemed a little random, that why these places and not other schools elsewhere.
Yeah. And then you had mentioned that the package that had this tape also had these like quote unquote government documents. It was like they were obviously faked documents designed to be like the Canadian government discussing like a downed extraterrestrial spaceship. Is that like, am I getting the kind of?
Yeah, I mean, they look like documents by someone who'd watched movies of what these documents looked like. I mean, they're not even properly censored, but like everything was perfectly spaced out. Like alien forces exist and an ideological war, and they're rambling. They don't even read like government documents. They read like a manifesto by like a right-wing QAnon person. It's just because they mention Red China and they mention Iraq spelled wrong. And the cover document that talks about the crash specifically has got 2 Polaroid photographs photocopied on the front. So it's just, like I said, it's something that looked like a teenager had made. Someone who had watched too much X-Files, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. But it like certainly one thing about this case is whoever was involved, like whoever Guardian is, who still hasn't been identified, they were certainly into the UFO phenomenon to be able to use the right language and contact the right people. So it was someone kind of in that world. But unless I'm mistaken, this is the story that they had was that the Chinese and Canadian government were conspiring to hide this extraterrestrial crash. Is that like to summarize the madness of those letters? Is that in essence what is in there?
It was, I can't remember if it was to prevent or to start an ideological war, but yeah, Red China is mentioned. There was a mention of some sort of a secret bunker in Carp where the alien bodies were taken, which is funny. I'm not sure if it was speaking specifically of the Defen bunker, but I mean, why not mention the Defen bunker, which was not too far from that area. It was sort of rich in that kind of sort of almost science fiction pulpy folklore. Like from a writer, I can definitely appreciate the creativity. As an investigator, I'm like, why would anyone believe this? It's the sort of thing that that gives ufology the bad reputation, because they basically assume that UFO investigators are all, like you said, like the sort of the tinfoil hat wearing people. There are some people who are like that. Obviously, the stereotypes do come from a place like this sometimes. And it's hard because you're trying to give credibility to something that is, in essence, I guess, a pseudoscience. But there are good people in the field. There are people that are doing it, like Chris Rakowski, like one of the most respected and best investigators in the field, and has been for a very long time. It's hard. It's hard because it's such a compelling subject, but it's also hard to believe. And when we don't want to believe in something, we sometimes our response is to ridicule it, oh, well, that must be crazy. So I get it, even so many years later, where I sort of still keep a toe into the ufology world to see what the current cases are. I can understand why some people think it's ridiculous. It's just, I've always tried to be really respectful of the people, even when I don't necessarily believe the stories that they're telling me.
Yeah, I get that. And in this case, the easiest part to ridicule is the letters and that weird manifesto, but it's the videotape cassette, I think, that really gives this case legs. And the reason for that is, for one, what's shown of supposed a purportedly a crashed saucer. Nobody's really been able to definitively say what they filmed or who filmed it. Can you just again describe the period in the tape, in the VHS tape that Guardian included? That again, I love the idea of the tape too. It was just a blank tape with Guardian and then a fingerprint on there, and that's so mysterious.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, it's like almost like the documents themselves. It was almost something that I don't want to say juvenile, but it's almost like something that someone saw in a movie. Like there's a bit of Dr. Strangelove in there. There's a bit of All the President's Men, and then a bit of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's just this rich panoply of material. Again, like as a person who makes a living writing creative fiction, I can totally respect. Like I said, the tape itself, even watching it now, rewatching even the Unsolved Mysteries footage, which is still a fantastic program, it's spooky. It's still compelling. I look back on that, and I look back at that time fondly. I don't look back at it ever as a waste of my time. It helped form who I am today, not just as a writer, but as a person, and what I believe and how I approach this stuff. But I remember at the time, one of the original investigators, the one who passed just last year, sadly, Tom Theophanis, he saw what he was sure in freeze frames was the windshield of a very conventional pickup truck, which you would think that, okay, well, it's really hard. It's a grainy video. We're not even sure if it's first gen. It could have been duped many times over, and it's dark. How can you tell us? Well, Tom's job at the time, his business, was windshield repair, So I mean, this is something that he would know. And when you look at it, again, it's hard to tell. It could just be, like what was generally believed, one of the investigators was that it's a pickup truck with lighting attached to it, floodlight, the strobe on the top, road flares, which you can get anywhere, Canadian Tire. The alien images were very easy to fake. A friend of mine and I faked them ourselves. I've still got the Polaroids. Just white latex gloves and a white garbage bag on your head with cutout eyes. It was great. It was just. I remember Unsolved Mystery saying it would have cost like $100,000 to recreate the stuff in that video, which is so not true. It's so
what you see in the video. It's such a vague kind of scene anyway. You just kind of see some far away lights on the ground. It's almost like if you just kind of peeked over a fence and filmed like a mall off in the distance.
Exactly. It could be anything. Could be anything.
So
yeah, and again, like it's the context, right? It's if the tape had just been sent without the label, without the documents, without the previous material, which ended up, I think, hurting Guardian's credibility. I don't think people would have paid as much attention to it, but because it's just one element in this larger case, with this persona attached to it, is just what really made it so compelling. Even the people that were so dismissive of it. The Canadians, especially, who had already dealt with Guardian, they went up maybe a couple of times in, I guess it would have been the summer, early spring of '92 with Bob Exler. They were pretty dismissive of it. They'd already got stuff from Guardian before. They'd written him off as a hoaxer. The tape is interesting, but still not really conclusive of anything. And they were just pretty quick to say, just Guardian's up to old tricks again, and whereas Bob seemed to really, I don't want to be too and act like he had an agenda, but I mean, he was a lot more set in he was more convinced. He was not going to be unconvinced that there was something here. He was going to find it. And that day went tromping off into the woods and sort of left everyone else. It was him and his son, and then miraculously found the landing site somehow.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about him. The way I see it is Guardian and the shipping of these weird packages to different UFO investigators and universities around the world. If Guardian is like this bucket of old oily rags in someone's basement, then Bob Exler is very much like, a misplaced match in said oily rags.
I would say that's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, Bob's passed away last year, and I never want to speak ill of the dead. Obviously, no. I did not have a good experience with Bob. I worked with him directly, and he was not kind to me. He was quite deceptive, actually. And again, it's not in my nature to sort of bring that out. But at the same time, it's you sort of actions speak louder than words, and he definitely had an agenda with this. And I think, as you've seen a lot of ufologists want to sort of attach themselves to one case and sort of own it. And Bob was very territorial with Guardian. His initial interest in me to try to get me to work with him, when he found out I could get something for him, was, well, I'll put you in the book that I'm writing about Guardian. That was his way of trying to entice me. And I admit, as a young man, it was like, oh wow, great! I'll be in a book about UFOs. I've got hundreds of them. That wasn't the reason why I wanted to work with him. The reason why I wanted to work with him was because he was the guy that was in all the TV footage. He was. I didn't know about the Canadians' involvement when I first heard about Guardian, because it's just Bob on all those shows.
Absolutely.
Graham Lightfoot is in one of them, but largely it's Bob in encounters and in sightings, tracking down Guardian. So I just reached out to him, looked up his number in Maryland and called him up. And when he found out that I was interested and that I wasn't connected to MUFON Ontario, he sort of saw someone that he could use.
Wow. It's kind of that's kind of dark. But how does Bob, like, he's an American, how does he get involved in being, at least for a period of time, like the face of this case and the face of the hunt for Guardian? Do you know how Bob Exler became involved in this?
Well, he was one of the people that received the Guardian material, and as for the TV coverage, he just had the connections. He felt that he could. The whole idea of the Unsolved Mystery segment was to flesh out Guardian, because this was around the same time as like America's Most Wanted. These are the same kind of programs where they've got the tip line. They're very good at fleshing out suspects, getting leads on things. And that was how they got their first tips for the very first Guardian suspect in that area. I mean, it's a small community, right? People talk. And that was how investigators initially got on to find out who they thought was Guardian at that time. And that was originally why Bob did it. Bob was sort of putting out his shingle. He really wanted to monetize this case. He was already selling the Guardian video in UFO magazines for like $35, and that was, if you see the tape, which is, I think it's available online, you can see it on YouTube. He talks about further tapes. There was going to be like a 2-hour extra tape where they do more analysis and interview further witnesses. He was really sort of staking his claim and going to franchise this thing, and make it his own. And I wouldn't say that the Canadians quashed that through any kind of malevolent reason. It was just they knew that it wasn't true, and that Bob was actively manipulating the evidence. And that's sort of where I came in. The RCMP was involved in the case for like a totally random reason, which we can get into if you want. But there was an RCMP file, a declassified sort of an access to information file that Bob wanted, and he couldn't get it. As an American citizen, he couldn't get it. Even the Canadian investigators couldn't get it. All they could get was a 10 or 15 page final report. But they knew that this investigating constable had taken photos, had his personal notes, which were all accessible if they knew how to get it. My father was in the RCMP and helped me lodge the proper request with access to information. So suddenly one day I get this 200 page bundle of documents in the mail, and they're all censored. But if you know who all the players are, and I did, it was pretty easy to fill in those blanks. And the minute that I start reading this document and I find the investigator's notes on Bob Exler and what he thought of Bob and things that Bob wasn't telling me, that's when my eyes started to be opened about, one, why Bob wanted this document, and put me in touch with the Canadian investigators, who only confirmed my suspicions. And what the RCMP was saying was that Bob was a bit of a character, and they sort of questioned his motives for investigating this case. And not to mention trying to use the RCMP, not just as a cudgel to sort of get Guardian to come out, but it also, Bob likes to align himself with government agencies. One, so it looks like they're working together, and two, because he sees it as sort of a swap. It's like, hey, if I help you, you'll give me some of your secret UFO documents. And this investigator was having none of that. He could see right through it, and was just having none of that. And I actually spoke with him. I was able to meet with that investigator when I went up there, and he confirmed the same thing to me in person. Did not think much of Bob Exler at all.
Hello, listeners. Sorry to interrupt the show like this, but I thought I had to stop things and let you know that I've recently become addicted to a new app called Stereo, and I want to tell you about it. Here's how I'd best describe Stereo. Imagine if somehow a telephone, a podcast, a talk show, and a 1-900 number collectively had a baby. And that baby was a free app you could download right now. That's it. It's a weird way to put it, but I think if you try Stereo, you'll agree. The Stereo app has thousands of live social conversations organized by genres that serve every interest. As a user, it's up to you whether you want to be a co-host, participate as a guest, or simply listen in on live conversations like a fly on a wall. Listeners of Nighttime probably can tell by now that I'm one for chit-chat, so I'm very much at home on the Stereo app. In fact, I'm going to try to incorporate my Stereo conversations into future episodes. My plan is a sort of blind date conversation. I'm going to simply link up with strangers around the world and talk to them about issues parallel with the topics covered here on Nighttime. Some of the people I'm speaking with may be listeners. Some may be people who don't know what a podcast is. And many may not even be able to point to Canada on a map. So it's going to get interesting. I'll try to include some of the conversations at the end of some future episodes, but if you want to hear it all and listen live, I'll make it simple for you. Join me on the Stereo app, and I'll be live most weekday mornings. To download Stereo, go to stereo.com/nighttimepod. I've also added the link in the episode description as well. But again, it's stereo.com/nighttimepod. I hope to see you there. I love Stereo. I'm on the app talking all the time, so make sure you follow me and you'll get notified every time I go live. How did the police get involved? Like, was something reported to the police in that area?
Yeah. This was, I believe it was called it was like a special investigation for the public or something. It was basically a courtesy investigation. It started with an individual in that area. If you recall the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast, after the Guardian event took place, a spooky black helicopter swept over the area. Mm-hmm. Well, people in that area had been reporting low-flying helicopters for years. So this individual who was connected with the case lodged a complaint with the RCMP about low-flying helicopters in the area, which is against the law. So because that report was wrapped up into the Guardian case, the constable ended up investigating the case sort of as a whole. You sort of couldn't pull the two apart because, yeah, the RCMP does not investigate UFO cases like Guardian unless a law is broken. So that was how the RCMP sort of came in. And again, I'm trying to remember the exact wording of the report, but it was basically a special investigation for the public, in the interest of the public. Yeah, it was, again, it just adds more to this wackiness of this story.
Yeah, and it just, like, I guess that report, however much merit it had, it at least put in contact Bob Exler with an official, investigator who was assigned to it, and just further perpetuates the whole madness that goes on. And we've talked already about the different documentaries, Unsolved Mysteries and whatnot. So Bob Exler, this American who finds out about the case and firmly takes the lead role, as these documentaries and all that air, he's again still the lead person. He appears in all of them, so it's very much his case. But somehow within all of this happening, it seems like it implodes on him. And he not only walks away from this case, he walked away from ufology, I think, for the rest of his life because of things that happened within the Guardian case. Do you know what it was that led to, him putting his tail between his legs, basically, and leaving?
Well, I think what it really comes down to is the fact that there really wasn't anything to the case. I mean, he was trying to really inflate it into something that it wasn't. And he was trying to bring in other people and their sightings to fortify the Guardian case. And it just didn't work. There wasn't any material there, and he kept getting his legs sort of knocked out from under him every time. And I think he finally got frustrated. And you have to remember that Bob was also coming off cases like Gulf Breeze. He was a big proponent that Gulf Breeze was true, and it wasn't. So I think even among MUFON, it wasn't just like the Canadians versus the Americans. Even MUFON in the United States was kind of done with them at that point. So I think maybe that might have been why Bob was trying to attach himself so strongly to the Guardian case and was coming up to Canada so often. It was sort of a last-ditch effort to salvage something from his career. And because, Bob was another person who promised a book about this that was going to expose the truth. And we didn't get a book. What we got was an anonymous individual calling himself, I believe it was Alex, on the Usenets, attacking the Canadians. And you can find all this stuff online because the Canadians just say, nope, that's not true. This is actually what happened. And it was very clear that it was Exler trying to combat the criticism. But this wasn't just he said, she said. The facts were out there. This wasn't petty. The Canadians were very mature about this. They weren't going to be led down the garden path by someone who was trying to make a buck off of a lie is really what it boiled down to. And again, I had my own experience too. When I remember after I told Bob that I wasn't going to be sending him these documents after I found it, I was very polite about it. Bob got litigious with me. He threatened to sue me, and maybe he was just trying to scare a teenager. But even as a teenager, I knew that he had no grounds to bring any legal action against me. He was flailing, So, and not to mention also sort of reinforced the fact that this was someone I did not want to work with.
Wow, it's like the story. At the surface, there's this cool UFO story with the, and then the cool tape and this whole mystery of who is the Guardian and what's their motivation. But as you are introducing the different characters and consider their motivations and the individual stories that revolve around them, it's just the Guardian case is just this whole other world,
Mhm.
but it seems to largely have been forgotten. Like, I understand that back in the 90s, like there was a lot of discussion on Usenet and this was actively being researched and talked about. But I think today, even if you went to a Canadian UFO convention and you stopped 20 people, 5 of them may know about this case.
Mhm.
I think it's large. I wouldn't say it's been forgotten, but it's not as well known. So let me
Mhm.
ask you this: is what has led you to, I guess, dig it all up? Why is Guardian back in the news again and on a major CBC documentary?
Well, we like a mystery. And even though I think anyone with a serious and skeptical mind would dismiss the Guardian case as a hoax, it's still a compelling story. And it's still a great story to tell. And it was one that never got to be told completely with Unsolved Mysteries and the rest of the other broadcasts. So I think, especially with the documentary, it was nice just to have something on the record, because you have to remember too, is that the Guardian case was happening just on, like you said, on the news nets. It was just the cusp of sort of public access to the internet. If this had happened maybe 5 years later, maybe there'd be more of a record. If it had happening today with social media, oh, it would have exploded in ways we don't even realize. I still get emails, even before the documentary went into production. And I think this is how they found me too, was I'm mentioned in the MUFON Ontario report. So even as a published author now, when people Google me, they ask me, are you the same Ian Rogers that was involved in the Guardian case? Not a lot of people, but it still pops up every once in a while. And as you said, not a lot of them are alive anymore. The original investigators, this was 30 years ago. Or the people just don't want to talk about it. It can be a touchy subject for some people, which is understandable. It's a cast of characters. It was a wacky time, but it was 30 years ago. It'll be 30 years this August that the event was allegedly shot in that field. So it just seems timely to talk about it again, and because I wasn't totally aligned with MUFON Ontario, I had sort of my own little group, and I wasn't aligned with Bob Exler. I feel like I kind of had a bit of a unique sort of outer perspective. I wasn't involved with the personalities. I had kind of my own unique take on it, where everyone was still talking to me. I spent a lot of time talking to Bob Exler. I spent a lot of time talking to Tom and Errol and everyone else, which is why I always felt that I was in a great place to like write a book about it if I wanted to. And I never did. So being able to do this documentary was extremely satisfying, to be able to put the whole record down, because I'm not saying that it's the best story out there, but I did take a certain amount of pride knowing that I pretty much know the whole thing. Even the parts that I wasn't directly involved with, everyone spoke to me. I kept all my files, all my records, all my photos, all my interviews. It was a really exciting time.
Yeah, it's really cool. And what's one of the things that are so great about UFO Town is it's the story is told and investigated to an extent, but without a real like motive. So when I think of the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast back in the day, a big motivation of that was to try to get Guardian to come out of hiding and reveal themselves. And then when I see some of the other like sightings and whatnot, some of the other pieces, I can't help but watch it and think I'm almost watching like a bit of a promo for Bob Exler, the connected ex-NASA researcher who's about to, prove aliens are in Carp, Ontario. This story and in like the documentary UFO Town is really like, it tells the story of Guardian, tells the story of the people of West Carleton, who a lot of them have reported seeing things. So it is a bit of like a UFO town. I guess that I didn't realize this. I thought it was a very much an isolated incident, but there's been quite a few like reports, and that's just become a part of kind of the folklore in that area, likely due to when Unsolved Mysteries, back when it was at its peak, when that airs a program about a UFO in your town, I guess that's going to get people talking.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But when this documentary airs, it shows a lot of conversations with people who weren't associated with the Guardian story back when it happened, but have found themselves tied into it a bit. Now, we won't spill the beans, but the documentary does set out to further investigate who Guardian was or is. Do you make any progress in answering that question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to blow anything in the documentary, of course. The thing that I think UFO Town does really well, which I think really speaks to the quality work done by the producer Nick Crow and Katie Lemire, the director, is they really understood the case. That was why I really wanted to work with them. When they first approached me, I told them, like, if this is going to be like a Fox production where you're really going to spin the alien angle, I'm not interested. I firmly believe this is a hoax. You ask any of the other serious investigators, they will say it's a hoax. I don't want to be involved if you're going to be selling people a bill of goods. If this is, when I knew this for the CBC, I figured it was going to be more serious. But that was sort of my caveat before I even became involved in this. And they were all fantastic. But I think that's the reason why UFO Town succeeds. I think that it still really gets across the serious investigators' feelings about the Guardian case, while also entertaining the possibility that something actually was going on in West Carleton at that time. There were a number of people who had encounters and sightings completely independent of the Guardian event. And there are newspaper clippings that even before August 91, when Guardian was even supposed to have shot that videotape, that suggests that something was happening in that area. And I think that that's something that UFO Town does really well, because I'm still very much a hardcore skeptic, and I wanted my feelings on the Guardian case on that record. But at the same time, you can't discount the fact that there was people who didn't even know what Guardian was, especially at that time, who were seeing something, who were experiencing something in that area. And that's, it really just adds to the whole folklore to the area. It makes me want to go back. And it was nice to go back on from a retrospective sense, and using the internet to try to track down new suspects of who Guardian might have been, which we did. Track down suspects. I'm not saying that we found out who he or she was, but it really made me want to take another crack at West Carleton and really explore the mythology of that area.
Hence the name UFO Town, because when I heard the name, I thought, oh, could this going to be a story about some town that I don't know about where stuff had happened? I didn't realize, like, it seems like you set out initially, the filmmakers set out to cover Guardian, but it just slowly like zooms out and you just see kind of everything that's happening in the town. But one thing I want to ask is, when I read a lot of the old information about the search for Guardian, there was a specific suspect. The name escapes me, but there was one fella that a lot of people had suspicions that it was him, but I don't believe you even got into, he was even brought up in the documentary.
Without mentioning names, obviously for privacy reasons, there was a Guardian suspect who came out from the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast. It was a friend of his that called the tip line. This was a person in the area who was well known as a UFO aficionado, a little bit of an eccentric, and would never speak to investigators, which again really kind of just doubles down on the fact that they might have something to hide, as opposed to if he had just said, "I'm not Guardian, leave me alone." So when people don't want to talk to you or they act suspiciously, especially among the UFO investigator set, it just makes them perk up their ears even more. It is not my belief that this person is actually involved with information that I've had. I guess you could sort of say with the more recent investigation of the past year, just when we sort of redug back into the case. I do believe that I know who Guardian was, or at least I believe I know who is responsible. But again, it's the documentary took its own life in a different way. It wasn't necessarily about tracking down Guardian. Maybe like you said, the documentary was originally titled, when I signed on, it was going to be called Searching for Guardian. Uh-huh. And I think it became something bigger. It became a story about belief and why we believe the things that we do. And the Guardian case just became the litmus test for that idea. And I just think that that's much more interesting, because I think that the documentary picks up where Unsolved Mysteries ended off, and you get much more of the story. And if you really want the nitty gritty, because UFO Town is 44 minutes and not say 2 hours, you can go online. You can read the MUFON Ontario Carp report if you really are that hardcore interested. It's been there online for years. Mm-hmm. But I think what UFO Town does best is it explores Carp through the eyes of the psychology of belief. without getting down to like the nitty gritty of here's the suspects and we tracked them all down. That was much more of what I didn't want to do. I'm not there to harass anybody. I mean, when I watched the Fox show Encounters chasing the Guardian suspect, blurred face down the street, it was like, no, it's so sensational,
But that is good TV. Come on,
it's great TV. Don't get me wrong, but I remember when I said to the producers when I first signed on, I was like, we're not going to be chasing anybody, right? Because I'm not doing that. Like I'm also out of shape. You don't want to see me running down any streets.
Yeah. No, but the way it worked out is fantastic. A lot of experience I have with kind of the way a town can embrace a connection to ufology. I live not very far from Shag Harbor in Nova Scotia, and I go every year for the UFO festival. And you really get to see this small town in the middle of nowhere really come alive, and the different people in the town all have their story of something they saw or something their parents saw or some strange thing. And I really see how a story like this and a phenomenon like this can just weave its way through the culture that exists in a small town. And that just seems to be like in UFO Town, it really seems to be just pointing a camera at that and using kind of the Guardian case as an entrance point, into this little world.
Well, let me tell you, when I was there for a lot of the filming, when they're talking to the other people who had their experiences independent of Guardian, what you're not seeing in those footages is when they're talking to the camera, I'm usually in the same scene behind them. They're talking to me. So it was almost like I got to be a UFO investigator again. And in an area that I hadn't really been to in almost 30 years, it was those old juices coming back in where I'd been, pouring all that stuff into my novels and short stories and screenplays, but this was me back in the field. It was really energetic. It made me really want to almost get back into it again. Yeah. And I mean, if I had the opportunity to go to any UFO themed events, just to talk about Guardian or to talk about anything, let's sort of say, hey, I'm from UFO Town, and not in a celebrity kind of a sense, but just in sort of a like you said, there's not a lot of people who really know the full Guardian story. And I think who can really speak about it with any real hard judgment one way or the other. Like, I obviously believe that it's a hoax, but I don't have any ill will towards it. It was such an incredible experience. It was the highlight of my UFO investigating career. I'd done stuff before that and after that, but after Guardian, everything's downhill from there. You're never going to have a cast of characters like that. Our government involvement. It's like a mysterious whistleblower. Like it's incredible. It's a great story.
Half Twin Peaks, half X-Files, and then there's also like a bit of a Jerry Springer show vibe as the whole thing comes crashing down. So exactly. You talked about like having a strong interest and connection with the UFO world and investigating. Why did you walk away?
You know what? I think it was a combination of being sort of disenfranchised with Bob and the way I was treated by him. You have to remember, I'm 16, 17 at the time. I'm still a kid. I like to think that I'm intelligent, but I still know it's like Dirty Harry in the old, the old Clint Eastwood in the old Dirty Harry movies. A man's got to know his limitations. And I felt like I could really add something to the investigation, but I also knew that I was still young, and I knew that I wasn't quite there yet. And I felt like I was just disenfranchised by the whole thing. And it wasn't just the fact that Guardian was the case was a hoax. I almost pretty much knew that when I was going up there. I was going up there for my own reasons, but it was just the field itself. If these are the professionals, this is the guy that's on the TV show. He's a former NASA mission specialist. I felt jaded, and after that, when it was just investigating sightings where there isn't even any videos or footage or anything, it's just you're going to talk to someone who said they saw something. What do you do with that report? It wasn't really as interesting. I sort of funneled that into my fiction, basically, but still kept in contact with the Canadians. And in the early 2000s, I was a regular guest co-host on Strange Days Indeed, which was a radio show on CFRB in Toronto, hosted by Errol Bruce Knapp, who was one of the original Guardian investigators. So I kept in touch with these guys. They're great people. Had long relationships with them years afterwards, just in terms of talking general UFO topics. But for me, investigating, I've got a lot of respect for the field, but there's a lot of people out there who are just kind of kooky, or they have their own agendas that are driven by money or things that are not science-based. And that was largely why I got out of it. And even these days, you don't really see a lot of big cases anymore. I can't remember the last time there was a really big case that rocked the UFO world. I think maybe the so-called Roswell slides, which they turned out to be, you could say hoaxes as much as everyone else's, or misidentifications if you want to be kind. But again, it was just more of the same to me. Someone trying to make a buck with something that turned out to be not aliens yet again. So.
Well, I think people who listen to my show will be excited to dig into the story of Guardian. I know they'll be excited to watch the documentary. I watched it, and it was one of the better UFO themed documentaries because of, like, for all the reasons we said. It didn't focus squarely on a case. It more focused on the people associated with it, and that's always the part that I find more fascinating. So for people watching who want to learn more about you, find your books, or learn more about the Guardian case, what are some places we should go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on all the usual social media spots. If you go to the CBC site, there's an essay on there about my days as a teenage UFO investigator, where I get to sort of explore a bit more on stuff that doesn't get told in the documentary. I have a website at ianrogers.ca. And that's where I post most of my writing news. But yeah, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. If you're following any of the UFO Town stuff on CBC, most of that stuff links back to me. I'm pretty easy to find online. I spent 20 years as a web developer, so I've got a pretty well-developed digital footprint, as they say. So I always invite people to reach out and talk to me about writing or UFOs. If they want to ask me about UFO Town, it was such a great time. The crew was incredible. CBC has been great. As I said, I got to see an advanced screener of the documentary a couple of weeks ago with my wife, and it, like you said, it looks fantastic. It is so professional. It's so well done. It's respectful. I think it really gives a lot more of the story of the Guardian case, while also being an exploration of the larger issues of belief. I think it just really, really effectively covers both those things. I think people are really going to dig it.
I want to thank you for joining Ian and I for our discussion about the Carp, Ontario, aka Guardian UFO case. Although it's pretty clear that the majority of the Guardian case is the work of a hoaxer, but at least in my eyes, that doesn't take away from the fantastic nature of this story. When some shadowy figure starts sending VHS tapes of flying saucers to the world's UFO investigators, I'm all in. And with that, we'll start wrapping up tonight's episode. But I must say my coverage of the Guardian UFO case isn't quite done yet. As it turns out, a friend of mine and a past guest of the show was one of the few investigators that the Guardian targeted with their weird mailings back in the 80s. In the next episode of Nighttime, Canadian UFO researcher Chris Rutkowski will join me to both discuss CBC's UFO Town and share his memories on the Carp case. And that'll be out shortly. But until then, I'm going to end with thanks. First, a massive thank you to Ian Rogers for taking the time out of looking after his cats to discuss this case with us tonight. Also, a thanks to the folks at CBC for dedicating airtime to the exploration of stories such as this. The UFO scene is much more fascinating than the layman may realize, and documentaries like UFO Town only prove it. I recommend everyone listening check out the film. I've added links in the episode description of where you can watch UFO Town online for free right now. And next, a big shout out to Monty Data for contributing the music for this episode. It's a piece called Noir Tokyo. And lastly, a massive thank you to everyone who listens to Nighttime. Without your interest and your support, Nighttime would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping the show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, please subscribe to the premium feed. Not only does it make the show possible, it'll give you more of each topic than you're going to find here in the free feed. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can keep the show alive at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And with that said, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. The Dark Canuck, Melanie, sister to my favorite twin, Catherine, and Kayla. Thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show but can't help financially, you can give me a huge hand by simply sharing the episodes on social media or letting your friends know of what we're doing here. Also, if you have any story ideas or want to give feedback on this episode or the show in general, you can reach me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. And I'm also on social media. I use Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'm on YouTube most Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sunday nights at 9:15 Eastern. So until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte. Copyright Jordan Bonaparte.
Before you go, let me ask you, did this episode not completely fulfill your nighttime fix? Well, let me remind you that I'm busy on the Stereo app. I'm live often, chatting with strangers from around the world about topics similar to those discussed here on Nighttime. And I really hope you join me. Download the Stereo app right now and join me live this week. I'm at stereo.com/nighttimepod. Or, to make it a bit easier for you, you can simply click the link in the episode description. Join me on the Stereo app, and I'll see you there. Hey, how's it going?
Doing great, thanks. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Is this Bitter Lollipop? Is that your name?
Yeah, it's Bitter Lollipop,
Where are you at?
Iran.
Oh, Iran. Fantastic. Your New Year is coming up soon, right? Your New Year celebration?
Yeah. We got more rules.
Nice. I'm in Canada. There's lots of Iranians here, but my martial arts instructor is from Iran. So he has been telling us a lot about his plans to celebrate the New Year, which is, I guess, a very big deal in Iran.
Yeah. I think most of people in Iran, when want to migrate, they go to Canada,
My martial arts instructor told me this story about it's tradition to go door to door with a bowl and a spoon collecting treats or something on New Year. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
But what's your life like? What do you do?
What do you mean by that?
What do you have kids? Do you work? What occupies your time in life?
I'm only 17 years old.
Oh.
Yeah.
So that's all coming in the future. Do you use Stereo often, or are you new here?
Yeah, I installed this app a few days ago.
Yeah. Do you like it so far?
Yeah. I
take it
installed
through.
that to improve my speak skill.
Oh, you're very good. What is your native language?
Absolutely Persian, because I'm living in Iran.
Okay. How did you learn English in school?
In Iran, they teach English in school, but you won't teach very well. You should take class.
Yeah. Well, using an app like Stereo will help get you experience talking to people in English